It's a very, very interesting concept, the whole idea of introducing back into the mix email. It's one of those things that's really gone out of favour in recent years. I mean, it's been quite interesting to kind of watch its evolution over the decades as a marketing tool. But with the rise, well, the huge rise and dominance of social media marketing, we found that email has almost sort of become sort of a lost art in many, many ways. Although in recent years, I would say probably the last sort of 12 to 18 months, it's become very much more back in vogue. And a significant number now of marketers are realising its value to the overall marketing communications mix. And it's used for a variety of different purposes. I mean, obviously we can be using this to keep in touch with colleagues and partners and associates. But when it comes to the customer side of using marketing, using email within your marketing mix, we see a significant proportion of marketers saying that actually, you know, for finding and keeping in touch and developing new customers, it has a really significant part to play. And it's also got a very, very important part to play in retaining customers. And it is these two elements that we're going to explore as we go through this particular session. And for me, it's quite interesting to really be thinking about the purpose behind email. If you think that email is all about newsletters, then there's a whole host of other things that we can do. But obviously, as with all of these types of marketing tools, it's about starting off with a really clear focus as to kind of what you're trying to achieve, because email and sending and receiving of email is just one of a whole myriad of different tools that we can actually use to achieve our goals. But it's those goals that are your starting point. So email is just another tool, much like your website, much like developing an app, much like using social media, much like face-to-face communications. These are tools to enable you to achieve your goals. They're not necessarily the end point in themselves. And the reason I say that is that a significant proportion, almost 2/3 of marketers, when surveyed, will tell you that email is probably their biggest source of return on investment in marketing. In other words, it is very, very easy at a granular level to measure the success. And this is really, really important and something that we'll come on to a little bit later in this webinar. But it's very important that if you're looking to achieve a return on investment from the activities that you do using email, it's very important that you start by figuring out the why, not just the what. The what is that I'm going to use email, but it's very important that you figure out the why. Why am I using email, and how am I going to realize when my email is actually being successful, and how am I going to realize when it could be improved, and what am I then going to do about it? So measurement is really, really fundamental when it comes to successful email. Now, what we've seen over the last few years across the whole kind of digital piece when it comes to marketing is that mobile has become the platform of choice for your customer. It doesn't matter what sector, what industry, it doesn't matter how mature your customer relationships are. The vast majority of customers now are migrating in the direction of mobile access for all of the digital communications that you push towards them. And the same can be said of email. So 50%, according to Campaign Monitor, 50% of email is now being opened on mobile. And of course, in some sectors, and yours might be one like this, it can be significantly higher. So this is taken as an average and aggregated over a whole range of different sectors. So you might find that your particular industry is a little behind the curve, or that you might be significantly ahead of the curve, in which case the mobile access of your email is going to be a very important consideration, and we'll cover why that is in a short while. It's, though, very, very important to realize when you start thinking about that, the balance of access with the balance of success. So if we look at, for example, and this is one of a number of different studies that are available, which talk about the access by device versus the revenue that you create if you were looking to then maybe aggregate your activity with sales. So in other words, we can see that there's a big proportion now of traffic and access by mobile, but that doesn't necessarily equate to the return on investment. So just because things are busy, just because things are happening, doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting a return. Now, I always talk about this in terms of things like vanity metrics. In other words, you look at your open rates on your email and you say, hey, look, I'm doing a great job as a marketer, without following through and seeing what the end outcome is. So you might have great open rates, you might have amazing click-through. In other words, people are actually interacting with the emails, but then you hit a barrier, then they don't go any further. So the actual return is potentially quite a lot less. So when we look at the revenue by device, for example, there is still a significant part to play by balancing email that you'd expect through mobile with email that is going to be accessed by desktop, for example. So let's not, as we start this whole journey of exploring email and whether or not it's going to fit into our mix right now, let's not make judgments and assumptions. What we have to do is be looking quite deeply at the outputs and the outcomes from everything that we do when we start to look at email, and figuring out, one, whether it's working, two, whether there's a better way, three, whether we could continuously improve it, and four, whether or not actually it's got a part to play at certain points in our customer's journey. So we mustn't start this thing by making assumptions that email is kind of old school and it's not really relevant, or assumptions like, well, when we did it before, it kind of resulted in this, therefore it's not worth doing it again. Or, oh, well, no, everybody's on social now, so let's not use email. Let's not make those assumptions. Let's try and delve quite deeply into the things that happen and figure out whether or not we can get a good return. Now, quite interestingly, when we start on this whole email journey, one of the things that often can be the make or break, and we'll look at this when we look at some of the 8 tips that I have for you of things to start exploring within your email campaigns. One of the very first things that can be the make or break is the subject line. Now, there's lots and lots of research that you can find on the importance of getting the right kind of subject line. This particular survey by OptinMonster found that around about half of recipients will make the decision whether or not to open an email based on the subject line alone. So even if they have, for example, on their desktop, they might have a preview there so they can see that you've got some lovely images, some lovely content in there for them, but that half of them are going to make the decision as to whether or not to actually read it properly based on the subject line. So it's super important that you get these subject lines right. And we'll look at some good practice in just a moment. And really interestingly, over 2/3 of recipients of email will report email as spam based solely on the subject line. So we have to get this bit right to even get people started on their journey of interaction with our emails. So the subject line is absolutely critical to get things started. But let's take a few steps backwards before we kind of get into that, because my very first tip here in 2020, when we're looking at email and some of the best practice, and of course a lot of this is based around the research that is coming through from a whole bunch of organizations who are predominantly platforms providing email services, and I'll share some of those with you in a little while. A lot of this is coming down to the fact that, first of all, we've got to be able to capture quality email addresses. Okay, so we've got to figure out as marketers where and when is the best time to ask for an email address, to collect an email address. So if we think about our customer journey, if we expect somebody to part with their email address at that very first point in time when they maybe come to our website, so the website's presented to them and then literally within seconds a pop-up appears on the screen, give us your contact details because we want to market to you. Well, how would that make you feel? So, of course, what we're doing here is we're trying to figure out an appropriate point in the journey where there's a bit of a trade going on. In other words, what as an organization or a brand are you willing to give in return for them giving you something? What is going to be valuable for your customer so that when they give you this really precious asset they have, their email address to you, what is it you're going to give in return? So there's a bit of a trade that goes on when you capture an email address. And of course, if you're capturing the email address at the point just post a transaction, then you might decide, well, actually, we've just done that transaction. So we've converted them. So we've given them enough value already. And what we're doing is we're capturing email address so that we can keep in touch. Now that might in itself be enough value. But if you're looking to capture an email address earlier in the transaction, in other words, as they're going through the awareness phase, building confidence with you that you're the right kind of organization to do business with or to buy a product or service from, then you've got to make sure you're giving them really, really good value in return. Now, often in a business-to-business environment, we see this in the form of things like white papers, or maybe access to a how-to guide, or maybe here's a free download of something in return for that email address. So figure out what you're going to give in return. Something that will add value to their experience, something that will give them a really good sort of outcome, something that's obviously very relevant for where they are in that process, but also what's going to kind of brighten their day in lots of ways. So having figured out how you're going to do that in terms of that balance of return, then we've got to figure out, okay, so having kind of captured that address, what is going to be my content strategy? What kind of things do I want to kind of share? What kind of expectation am I going to give to this customer who's giving me, as I say, this really, really important asset, their email address? Because there has to obviously be, from their perspective, quite a lot of trust that they're kind of almost entrusting you with this piece of really important contact information. So if they're willing to do that, maybe as part of this kind of bartering, part of this conversation, it's a very, very good time for you to share just how often you're going to be using their address in return. In other words, is there a newsletter or some kind of subscription that they're in effect signing up for? So actually setting that kind of transaction level at this stage as you capture their details, I think is really, really important. And what kind of stuff are you going to be sharing with them? Because if they've given you their email address, they're going to want to know the frequency of how often you're going to contact them. They're going to need to know, what kind of things am I going to hear as a result of, me giving this detail across? And, what value is that going to add in my whole experience with you and your brand? And particularly if this is at a point where you're kind of welcoming somebody into your fold, into your mix for the first time, make sure that you back up that capturing of the email with a really sound welcome. So if somebody is in effect subscribing to something as a result of giving you their email details, really welcome them. Make this a really authentic and valid welcome into the fold. So yes, you're sharing the practicality of what they're going to get as a result of this, but also make them feel valued, make them feel part of a broader kind of experience here. So now you've got their email address, what are you going to do? Well, this is where we then start with this whole idea of choosing an appropriate subject line. As again, with this whole thing, and this is actually one of the sort of marketing areas that is just so well researched. You can find a lot of different reports, and if these don't particularly fit with your particular industry or your particular brand, go and do some research in terms of top keywords in your industry. There's a lot of research out there. But in essence, before you start to think about some of the words that are statistically more likely to get that engagement in the subject line, what you need to be thinking is, okay, well, what are my themes for my emails? In other words, am I going to help people to understand that they can not miss out as a result of opening up this email? Am I going to try and pique their curiosity as a result of me sending this email? Am I going to inform and entertain them? So am I going to use humor as part of this campaign for using email? Am I going to appease their ego? Am I going to help them feel good? So is this a little bit more of a sort of playing to some sort of vanity on the customer's part? Am I going to also focus on their pain points? Am I going to be talking to them about, we can solve your problems, we can achieve, sort of a greater outcome working together? All those kinds of sort of messages in terms of a theme can also be really, really important. Or am I just going to keep it simple? In other words, am I just going to communicate with them on maybe a month by month, maybe a quarter by quarter basis, and just keep it simple that these are just news updates? So you've got to figure out, and this is all about consistently delivering against a constant and credible theme. So figure out what's going to resonate both with you as a brand, you as an organization, but also from the customer's perspective. Now, maybe you'll decide it's a mix of different themes spread out over time, but there's got to be some clarity. And the clarity of your theme needs to resonate with your brand style, the tone of voice, the kind of organization that you are. So don't use humor if that's not your kind of tone of voice as a brand. Don't use the kind of pain points if you're all about delivering sort of high level value. The fear of missing out is all about that kind of commodity transaction. If that's not the kind of organization that you are, then don't use that. So figuring out a theme that resonates with you and your brand guidelines as much as it does delivering value to the customer is really, really important. Then you can go and do a little bit of research over the top words to include in the subject line. And as we said, this is a real make or break starting point as to whether or not your email campaigns are going to work. So make sure that you know the kind of comments or the kind of words that you need to be putting in there. Some examples that we've got here: words like upgrade, words like just, words like content, words like celebrate. And I like this particular one, introducing. That word introducing in your subject line, well, maybe that from the customer's perspective or the recipient's perspective makes them think, a little bit special. You're introducing something to me. Maybe I'm being treated a little bit differently here. So actually making them feel good, appealing both to the head and also to the heart at the same time. So do your research, figure out which are the top words in your industry, or use some of these more generic terms and go away and test and see kind of what works best. We'll talk about A/B testing in a little while. Then it's about making your content interactive, making your content really engaging and quite immersive. And I really like using this word immersive when it comes to email. I know when I first started using email sort of many, many years ago, it was all about the text content. It's now far, far more about interactivity. So we can embed video. HTML5 allows us to embed video very, very successfully. And of course, as we know, video is a very engaging medium. We can use quizzes, we can use some form of gamification to kind of, build a lot more kind of accessibility and interactivity into the content that we put there. We can invite product reviews, for example. We want this to be a conversation. Even though we've pushed the email to our recipient, we want them to come back with some added value feedback. If we want to inspire activity on a timely basis, we can put in things like countdown timers, where the countdown time, and it was really interesting because as I was putting this presentation together, literally about an hour later, for the first time in probably a number of months, I actually received an email that actually had a countdown timer in it. And it reminded me of the importance of stimulating an urgent response. What you don't want to be doing in your interactive content is making your emails look just super sexy and really, really great visually, and then not stimulating some kind of response in the moment. The more you can get people to do something in the moment they receive and read that email, rather than just park it into a folder, because as we know, they're never going to come back to it. So putting something in like a countdown timer adds a little bit of urgency into that interaction. And of course, we can add a lot more things in, and we'll talk about sort of omnichannel and sort of integrating with other digital tools in just a moment. But we can integrate things into our emails such that they're almost like a sort of a mini website within the email functionality. So we can add to cart integration, so somebody can just literally click a button to add to a shopping basket on a website within the email. So it's about being creative, it's about thinking about the journey, and it's also about thinking about inspiring that next step as quickly as possible within that interaction. And it's also about thinking about very much mirroring the typical kind of social conversational style that you're probably already familiar with if you're using the likes of Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and the like. Because now what your customer is generally going to be looking for is a slightly more casual not one-way sort of monologue approach to the style of email that you present to them, but something that interacts with them on an emotional level. Now, a lot of research that's come through in the last sort of 12 to 18 months has been about the use of emojis within email. And what we're seeing is that there's a lot of research now and a lot of evidence that's talking about the additional impact you can make by putting emojis both into the content, but also into the subject line. And you can see that with the research that's come through, by putting positive, quite light, but quite amusing, I guess you could call it, emojis into what might otherwise be slightly more sort of dry, slightly more serious content, you can lighten it and make it automatically more conversational. Make the style as well of the email content that you have, make it feel like it's being written and sent by somebody. So somebody who maybe is the face of the business, maybe it's somebody who you're using to tell stories on social media, maybe it is somebody who is sort of part of a relationship with a particular customer. So make this personal. Don't write necessarily just from the brand. There are many, many successful email campaigns that are happening right now, and a lot of these in the consumer space where individuals are being positioned as the sender of the particular email in the tone of voice and the content. A lot of these in terms of home shopping, and so one particular example that I really like is the retailer Riverford, who do the home delivery of fruit and veg boxes to your house, and they use one or two of their employees to be the face or the voice of the organization. And I just really like the way that they use that sort of conversational, real kind of person-to-person approach within the tone of voice and within the sign-off and actual signature of the email. So it really feels like you're conversing with a person. And what they also do, successful conversational and casual style emails, is they also really play on this idea of less is more. Gone are the days where people have, and particularly in this world of mobile access, where it is all about instant, short, sharp, quick impact on the mobile screen. What we're looking for here is really punchy written content. So when I talk about getting into conversational style, I'm not talking about using lots of words. I'm saying what we're talking about here is the style and not overdoing the amount of content in there. We want to get people to an interactive call to action as quickly as possible. So less is more. So rather than saying new innovations, well, we can lose the word new. Rather than saying forever and ever, we can just say forever, because those other words are superfluous. So look and review all of the content that you're putting out and see whether you can cut out unnecessary and superfluous words within this conversational style that you're using, because all of the research is pointing to open rates and click-through rates far, far higher by following these tips. Now, what we've talked about so far is very much about you being there, kind of using email in a very kind of proactive, in the moment way. But obviously with something like email, and a lot of the platforms, and we'll look at some of these in a moment, a lot of the platforms allow you and enable you to automate the interaction. In other words, what you can do is you can automate the automatic responses when somebody clicks on something on your website. You can then, if obviously they're in your database, you can send them an automated reply. And of course, this is something which is going to allow you to be doing things when it's out of hours, or when you have peaks of demand where your teams are focused on other things, maybe delivery to customers. So there's a huge value in automating in a very clear and very slick way parts of your email strategy. Now, I'm not saying you should be automating everything. I think there is certainly something, much as in social media, where there's a huge value of keeping this personal, making it real time as far as you can. But if there is an opportunity for automating, maybe the things like frequently answered questions, maybe automating some of the stuff which is much more process rather than people driven, where people don't necessarily expect an actual response, but they need some kind of backup and confirmation that they click the right button, so they get a little email confirmation that, yep, you're to the next point in the journey, where there doesn't need to be a personal interaction or a human intervention. I personally feel that that is a good point where you can start to add in automation. And I think also where it's being very heavily segmented, what you don't want to be thinking about when you think of email is one blanket email that goes out to all of your customers. The beauty of email and the beauty of segmenting your email allows you to automate responses to certain types of customers. So if you can group your customers, really understand your different customer personas, and then decide for each one how you're going to treat them, and maybe each individual persona is treated differently. So you have different email responses, you have different automation, you have different maybe style and tone of voice, and different actual execution of your emails based on each of those personas. Then you start a chance of being really specific and really focused and targeted with them. And of course, that leads us on to the next top tip, which is about considering your omni-channel approach. Now, what we mean by omni-channel is that you're looking then more holistically about how email fits in with all of the other ways that you communicate with your customers. And this isn't just digitally. So it's not just about how does email work hand in hand with social, how does email work hand in hand with our website. This is also offline as well. So for example, a lovely example here is very much when you go into store, and a lot of stores are doing this now. So you're in a particular retail outlet and they say, oh, can we email you the receipt? Well, one, obviously that saves a lot of paper, saves time, but also what it means is that there's data capture there at that point of purchase as well. So by integrating that journey and by saying, hey, well, we can give you a special offer. If we can take your email address, we'll send you the receipt, but also we'll send you a voucher, a discount voucher for your next purchase, or the next time you're in store, you get this extra benefit. So it's about using all of your different channels in this lovely seamless experience. And then basically what you're doing is you're rewarding people, your customers, for the more they interact with that experience. So if, for example, somebody advocates maybe in social media, then suddenly they receive by email a discount voucher or some kind of incentive. They will then potentially, and again, the research shows this, they will then potentially even share that experience as well. Your advocates are advocates for a reason. It's because they're very supportive of what you're doing. So you can use email as part of that kind of reward structure. And it's a really strong, powerful, interactive, one-to-one way of actually keeping them very, very focused on being, a top marketer for you. So start to think about how email can integrate with some of the other things that you do. Begin with the customer journey in mind. Don't begin with email. Email is just a tool. Email is going to serve parts and points in that customer journey. It's not the other way around. If you start with email and think, oh, where can email fit? You've probably missed the point. It's far better to think about the customer experience and then think, would email serve us here? What could email do for us here? How could email add value there? So do it from the customer journey perspective and do it for each of the personas' customer journeys, because some may find that email, it fits, and other personas in their journeys, maybe it doesn't fit in the same way or doesn't fit at all. So be really specific, and then you can start to really begin to integrate those channels nicely. And what this is really taking us towards is this whole concept of what we might term hyper-personalization. Because in an optimum way, what you're really trying to do here with your email strategy is to start thinking about individual customers. Even if you have 1 million customers, the concept of hyper-personalization is that the customer themselves feels like they're special, because they are. Because if you've got a customer who is an advocate, they're loyal, they should be rewarded as such. Now, of course, you can use things like email by kind of giving them that perception that that is actually what's happening, that is the value they're getting from you. So even simple things by using first names, in the Dear Neil, for example, or Hi Neil, or Neil, and then actually then introducing the rest of the content. all of the main software platforms that allow you to send and control and monitor your email allow you to do this kind of first name terminology. So I would strongly recommend that that's a really key thing in here. Almost runs parallel to the subject line, because if people can see that something's relevant to them, but it also looks like it's been designed and written for them, because in many ways with their big data that they've shared with you, you can optimize that email so that actually it is focused around them, because you know what they purchased, you know when they purchased it, you know that they've subscribed to this particular piece of content from you because they said they wanted to hear more about that particular topic. Then you can customize the email to them. And so by using big data, and of course keeping it authentic, you don't want this to then come across as, well, you're just processing my data. So you've got to figure out a way that always it feels like it's coming from that real person, because at the heart of this is your authentic brand positioning. But the more you can hyper-personalize, the better. So begin with that as a really, really strong intent, and you'll start to realize that there are different pockets of individuals within your customer database who need to be served in a slightly different way. The beauty of email is that you can do it that way too. And of course, that brings us on to the final of the tips here, which is another thing to really be thinking about as you construct this email strategy, is the whole thing about privacy and sort of data and confidentiality. Now, as we know with GDPR, you have to gain explicit consent. Now, you have to do that always. You know, as a good professional marketer, as a good sound business, you have to give an option every single time that you contact that particular customer for them to opt out. But one of the interesting things that you can do, and this is what I would think could really add some value to the lack of churn, if you like, of people unsubscribing, is that you think about the concept of segmented opt-out. In other words, if you give people the option to just unsubscribe from this particular sort of email, what you're doing is you're saying to that person, I'm only going to give you the chance to just basically disconnect from us as a brand. Now, it might be they just didn't want that type of content, but maybe there was other types of content that you could and would or have been sharing with them in the past that they would have liked, but it's just over the last couple of emails, I just didn't like what you sent me, so I'm going to opt out, I'm going to unsubscribe. Whereas in fact, actually what you did is you missed an opportunity for them to unsubscribe from that specific type of content. So it could be that I'm subscribed to your particular content, so I want your newsletter, but actually I only want it related to the products and services that I've actually got with you. I don't want to hear about, the cross-selling or upselling things that you might be wanting to do with me. So give me an opportunity to stay subscribed to you for the content that I want, but I want to unsubscribe for this other type of content. So segmented opt-out could give you a chance of just keeping that customer in your database, but just providing them with one unsubscribe option. Well, what choice do they have? It's either I'm in or I'm out. And of course, most people now with very, very busy inboxes will unsubscribe and they'll be out. And you've then got no chance to get them back. You could also as well, which is another really good thing in terms of good GDPR practice, is actually hand over control of the data to the customer. So give the customer a login, give them an opportunity to make those choices, give the customer an opportunity to segment the content you're going to share with them and the interaction and the conversation on their basis. So open up their account to them. A lot of these platforms allow you to do this. So people can then start to almost re-segment themselves, create the persona in a really accurate way so that you don't have to make sort of best guesses. They're going to do it for you. So for me, that's a really nice way of having this as a relationship. It's not about you holding data and saying, oh, I'm not going to let you sort of see your data and I'm going to hold it until you unsubscribe. That's not a relationship. What we're looking for here is this authentic, open, transparent way of using GDPR in a really proactive, positive way. So if you think about that and the way that you can allow that relationship to develop, you stand a much better chance of keeping that relationship fresh. And all of these kinds of things that we've been talking about here are available from a whole variety of different platform providers. The big ones that most people will have heard of, the likes of MailChimp, Constant Contact, and HubSpot, they all give an opportunity either for a free plan or an opportunity for a free trial. So you can go in and explore and play around with some of these things. All of the stuff that I've talked about here is possible within all of the big software platforms who allow you to control the data, manage the data, and then publish and monitor the success of your emails that you actually send out and distribute. So there's a really exciting opportunity here for putting some of this stuff into test. And what I always talk about as we go through this is kind of setting some expectations before you start. If you think as a marketer that sending out emails and creating campaigns is all about making it look pretty and seeing the open rates, then what we're doing is we're missing the opportunity here for setting some really good key performance indicators. Because the first few emails that you send out, doesn't matter how great they are, there's going to be room for improvement. So by setting up some expectations, some intentions, some key performance indicators that allow you to kind of benchmark what might be potentially quite a good outcome, it allows you then to measure against something. If you just send out a load of emails and then just see what happens, how do you know whether that was actually going to provide value to your targets or your objectives? Well, you don't. So start from that point. Look at this whole thing by saying, okay, I have to recruit, I don't know, maybe another 100 new customers. I'm just making numbers up here, but 100 new customers in this next quarter. Okay, so now I'm going to start to think about how email might contribute to that. So, okay, it's 100 customers. Maybe this next month I'm going to try and recruit 20 customers. Okay, so now you've got a target. So now you can start to use email based around that target as being your kind of North Star destination to figure out and work backwards to get 20 customers. How many emails do I need to send out? What is the open rate to get those 20 customers? Because obviously you're going to be looking at a multiplier because it's going to be significantly more than the number you send. You can use data, and Campaign Monitor's got lots of really good averages on global campaigns that they monitor, because obviously they're looking at thousands and thousands and thousands of organizations pushing content and sort of ROI through their platform. So they give us a really nice starting point for when potentially might be the best days for marketing, when maybe the best days for things like getting the optimum open rates, maybe the best bounce rates, maybe the number of click-throughs or opens. These are all averages. Yours are going to be different. So what I don't want you necessarily to think is that because Campaign Monitor says that globally, the best time to get your email open rates highest are to send out on a Tuesday. It might be, but it might not be. So use these maybe to start off creating your own KPIs and benchmarks, but then very quickly look at your results and figure out how they differ. Because these are global averages. To get an average, we obviously see a range of data. Now, you may well be average, but you may well be very, very different. So set your expectations of what you're looking for from this, as we've said before, that is just another marketing tool, and see whether or not that actually resonates with the targets that you've actually set. So it's really important to get your own numbers, have a look at the averages and the statistics, but set your own. It's really, really important. Okay, so let's look at a few examples here of some organizations who have created some email campaigns that kind of tick the boxes and answer to lots of these things. And what we're going to do is we'll see some that hopefully might resonate and give you a few ideas of what you can put out there and test. So the first one is a brand called Philosophy. And the reason I like this particular example is because it sets a really nice kind of personal tone. Even though they don't do the hi Neil or dear Neil or Neil, they do set a very, very nice conversational tone of voice. And it's very, very much something that looks at rewarding people for interacting. So there's a discount there, it is time bound, but it's more the tone and voice of this thing. It feels in line with the target persona. You can picture the persona because of the tone of voice and because of the style of this. Next example is the Adelaide Festival. This is a slightly older example from 2014, but for me it's a really nice, clear one that is using omni-channel links. You can see very, very clearly in this one that social media is integrated within this campaign. There are also opportunities here for not missing a trick. Now, I can tell that this particular festival, when they sent this out, they were uncertain what the call to action should be, because they've got some very, very different calls to action here. So they're giving choice. You could argue too much choice, and it should be one simple call to action, click the button. But what they're doing is, and I would suggest that this was an email that was sent out very early in the campaign to attract people to the festival, because it was very much part of giving the customer choice. They were showcasing some debuts for people who were going to be presenting and at the actual festival, so you could read more there. They were looking at maybe some more of the established acts, so you could read there. So there was clearly a catalogue and a history behind that. If you wanted to find out more about actually booking, there was also a link there. So this is really what we would term omni-channel. This is giving multiple choices to the person, very different to the philosophy account, which was very much about, look, here's some nice new products to shop with. It's kind of which product you want, click. Whereas the Adelaide Festival was very much more about, we've got a significant number of offers here. Do you want to engage with us? Do you want to read more? Do you want to book? It was very much about giving the choice to the customer. The not on the high street example here, I think, is a really nice one about resurrecting the relationship. It's very unlikely that if you're thinking about creating a campaign, that you're starting from 0 email addresses. And a lot of the email addresses that you might have actually in your database could well be organizations or individuals who you haven't really communicated with for some time. And I really like this not on the high street version, where they're kind of saying that, oh, hello, stranger, you know, it's been a while since you've opened an email from us, and we know, in brackets, we know because we've got data that shows that it was specifically you. And then actually looking to kind of trigger some kind of engagement, incentivize some kind of engagement, but actually asking the question in a really open way and saying, is it you or is it us? What can we do differently? Here's a little way of incentivizing a click-through. Use this promotion code. Do you want to unsubscribe? If you do, if you don't, but also you can connect with us by social media. So again, allowing that sort of almost that responsibility into the customer's hands to take the next step. So a really nice example there of trying to resurrect the relationship with what might be a tired or lapsed customer. Next example from Sports Car Digest is a very, very different style. I mean, a very, very different style of email, very much based around images and text. So for a lot of us, quite a long read. I don't think necessarily a lot of us would really resonate with this style of email, because it is very much about the long read. It's not something that's very, call to action driven. It's not about incentives. It's all about sitting back with this email and kind of, immersing yourself in some long stories. And in fact, there are nearly 10 stories there that you can click through to. And this is all about the point of knowing your audience. This particular email sort of data owner will know the audience is going to resonate with this, because they know that they're probably just settling back in their armchair with a cup of tea, ready to read some articles, read some blogs, read some information. Whereas the previous example, the not on the high street, is all about that instant decision, that instant impact. So knowing your audience and the kind of expectation they have and what they really would value is super important. This is not about you. This is about you talking their language in a tone and style and with content that really resonates for them. And of course, if we do that, we can then take up the idea of treating them almost as though they would perceive themselves as a VIP. This is one thing that Starbucks, as an example, do very, very well. As part of their email campaigns, often you will be receiving the whole idea of the concept of My Starbucks. And of course, My Starbucks is very much about, you taking ownership and being rewarded for your interaction and purchases with them. So this is again very much about treating somebody, and you may well have a series of very loyal customers or advocates who you want to treat in this way. And so loyalty treatment using email is a very, very good way of drip feeding in the retention phase of the customer journey, drip feeding ongoing interaction. So it may well be that your customers aren't actually ready to purchase right now, but maybe building points, maybe building loyalty, maybe giving them a little bit of a sneak preview of something that the general world don't see, and doing that via email can be just a very nice way of, as we can see from the Starbucks example, staying connected with us. So the thing I like about this particular one is that they're very open and honest about why this email has happened. It's staying connected with us. In other words, you're receiving this because you're a Starbucks insider. You are one of our VIPs. So we want to keep in touch with you. We're going to let you be one of the early people to hear about upcoming promotions, news and promotions and more. This is a really important thing when it comes to email. This is about that segmentation. If you have highly valuable customers, you need to treat them as VIPs. Email can really do that for you. And the final example that I really like here on this particular sort of subject is the integration of that kind of experience with website. The Riverford example here almost looks like a website. There's a price discount, there is an offer, there is a here's how you make your next order, there is a click here if you want to buy this particular product. It's a very website integrated approach. So no matter which button you click on, you go through to your basket on the website for the fulfillment. So again, it's about thinking how email integrates with that longer journey. These are just great examples that really showcase all of those tips that we were talking about. And another one that I particularly like here is this example from the Sydney Convention and Exhibition Centre, which was the simplicity of a single call to action. A lot of the stuff that we've explored so far has been very much around the choice that the customer might have when they receive the email, but there will be times where it is a simple single call to action. And that can be a very quick and very high click-through rate that you can stimulate just by making it very simple what you want them to do. And this one, a save the date. If it is a save the date because something new is coming and we're going to tell you about it in a future email, then just do a save the date. Just because you're sending an email doesn't mean you have to pack it full of other stuff that might distract and that might mean the person doesn't save the date because they just got taken down this other alley or this other sort of pathway or this other part of the journey. If you want them to save the date, give them a button to save the date and leave everything else. So the single call to action is also another really powerful use of it. You wouldn't do this every time, and it does need to become more of a conversation, but there's a time when a monologue and a single call to action has its part to play. And then if all else fails, this comes back to the whole kind of final chance of the segmented opt-out. And this is a particularly nice one that I like in terms of being very on brand, very, very stylish. Urban Outfitters, just look at the style in which this is done. This is not corporate. This is very much knowing the style and the tone of voice of the brand and knowing the style and the tone of voice of the person who's unsubscribing. The little sort of messages that come through here is, are we seriously breaking up? This sucks. We love you. Can we please stay together forever? And then you get the choice. And of course, then it's like, oh, go on then. All right, I'll stay. It just has that one final chance of not losing them. Now, of course, this might not be a style that you'd be going for because of your brand or your particular tone of voice, but it's about striking the right kind of balance. Don't give up until it's finally over, where somebody says, no, I am going, I'm unsubscribing, and that's it, I'm gone. Give people a chance to, as we say, maybe selectively unsubscribe from certain things. You've got the control here. The platforms and the software allows you to do this. So it's a really exciting opportunity to keep control and to keep building your database. So where do you take all of this? There's a whole host of things that we talked about in this session. So where would you take it next? Well, I would say it's probably focusing down on these 6 or 7 things. So I think your return on investment is going to be determined by the amount of effort you're going to put in here. If you choose to just send simple emails that don't really pay attention to all the stuff that we've talked about here, I think it's a shame, because if you were to spend a little bit more time, you would get those click-through rates, you would get those open rates up, you would reduce the unsubscribe rate. So it is directly proportional to the amount of customization that you can do and the amount of effort you're going to put in. Figure out multiple email collection points along your customer's journey. That's really, really important. It isn't necessarily just at the point of conversion where they've just become a customer. There might be other opportunities to collect email addresses on the basis of you giving value. You give a little something, they give you an email address. So figure out some of those points in the journey where it also might happen. Definitely inspire urgency and an immediate interaction. If you let somebody off the hook, you've lost them. They are not coming back to that email. As we know, in any kind of sort of sales and marketing interaction, if you lose them, you've lost them. People don't have the time or inclination to reverse back up the journey. So you've got to catch them at that moment. So inspire the urgency, put a timer on, put a time-bound thing against the offer or the discount or the voucher that you're giving. Make people redeem and take action right here, right now. And provide a clear call to action. If you're doing a newsletter, it's not just a newsletter. Make them do something as a result of it. Give them value. Focus as well on back-selling, cross-selling and upselling. There's multiple opportunities here for getting value from the email. It isn't just about announcing new stuff. Tell them the story about how the old stuff happened. Cross-sell something that could be relevant to them that they might also be interested in. And obviously be looking to upsell. And if it is about a subscription, can you develop that subscription into a more kind of loyalty scheme approach? A/B test everything. It's subject lines, it's the choice of images, it's the time of day that you send it, it's the day of the week that you send it, it's to this persona versus this persona. Do constant comparisons and repeat and repeat and repeat. There is no one format that's going to be perfect. And so be constantly looking and listening to what happens. And the final point really is keep an eye on AI and new levels of big data and customization. Do a regular search in Google. There are great organizations out there who are constantly watching this, so keep a watch on them as well. I mean, eConsultancy publishes quite a lot on this. The big players in the sort of research houses like Gartner's do a lot of interaction on this and talk about this. IBM is another great resource. Smart Insights have been doing sort of surveys and research recently. Keep an eye on AI, because there will be new levels of customization and automation coming down the tracks very, very quickly. But in the meantime, I would suggest focusing on those things. Clear call to action, focus on upselling, A/B testing, immediacy of the interaction, figure out where you're going to get these email addresses from, and everything above everything is all back to the return on investment. So set those targets, think about what you're trying to do, and then measure everything against those things. Open rates, click-through rates, yeah, whatever. That's kind of vanity metrics, really. What you're looking to do is hit some real targets by the email that you send through. So if you can do that, then you're starting to get some really great value from what is a newly emerging resurgence, if you like, from Phoenix from the Flames marketing tool that we call email. So I've got a few questions that have come through as I've been talking through this. So I just want to answer a few of these. Should we automate email responses out of hours? That's a really nice question, actually. And I'd say probably yes, but it does depend on the point in the journey. So I would say there is this point about automating email responses if it is a non-human interaction, but you probably have yourself seen examples and experienced examples where you think, you know, that was automated. They could have actually answered my question properly because I sent a reply and all I've had is an automated response back. Didn't really kind of improve the customer experience, didn't really help my experience of the brand. So I'd say yes, as long as it's a human, as long as it's not a human experience that you're kind of, you know, replicating. Another question, will my social media insights show the time of day similar to email? That's an interesting one. It might. That could be a starting point, actually. I mean, if you're sitting there or standing there thinking, you know, I don't know any idea at all when I should be sending out, probably actually having a look at your social media may well give you an insight into when your target audience, your target customers are active digitally. I mean, if you've been through the process of creating a persona, you'll kind of know the day in the life of, so you'll kind of know likely things that they'll be doing at certain points in the day. But I would say probably there is a correlation between the times when they're active on social media and when they're checking their emails. I mean, logic would say they're going to be quite similar, but test it out, go and have a little look. Try a few emails at the same times you know that you're getting better engagement on social media, and see if there is a correlation. And I would imagine for some of you that will be the case. Next question was, how do I avoid vanity metrics? Well, I think I kind of answered that in the top tips and the next steps, which was all about thinking, what am I trying to achieve here? So thinking about it, really going back to your marketing plan or your marketing strategy. What is my goal? If my goal is to get X number of new customers, or if my goal is to sell this amount of product to my existing customers, that is your starting point. So it isn't about just open rates and click-throughs, it's how many of those click-throughs then resulted in sales, for example. I mean, you've got to obviously figure out your own KPIs and your own targets, but that's how you avoid vanity metrics, is keep asking the question, and this means that. So when you see the open rate, this means that, and then keep answering that question all the way through to the point of real value. And the most likely point of real value is actually when you see a tangible return, either objective, so numbers, or more subjective, because it's improving your brand presence. Another question was, can I copy good examples from other brands? Well, yeah, I mean, I would certainly suggest that, you know, looking at good examples, maybe the ones that we've covered here, or doing a search on, you know, good case studies for email campaigns in my sector, and actually put your sector into the search. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it is all about getting a starting point. It is all about sort of, you know, getting off the ground, because if you're doing this A/B testing and really listening to what happens with every single email that you send out, very, very quickly you will have created your own. You'll have created your own good example, and even to the point of your own best practice. But I think certainly starting from some of these areas that have been very well researched in a sort of a global level at least gives you a starting point. But my recommendation would be, yes, copy good examples, but as quickly as you can, learn how to fine-tune them for your own purposes. And final question I've got here is, should I do a monthly newsletter? Oh, I always love this question. I've had this question many, many times. Thank you for asking this one, because it's really important to think about this. Okay, so I want to break those two words down, monthly and newsletter. I'd say yes, do a monthly newsletter if that is adding value to the recipients, to your customers. Is monthly appropriate? Monthly, to me, ties you into something which has both a benefit and also a negative with it. Monthly sets up a nice schedule. It sets you up a nice process and a nice calendar of a timeline. So that's the positive. Monthly can also be positive if that's related to what the customer wants and expects. That's a positive. The downside of doing a monthly is where you almost force yourself to send it out this month, but even if you didn't have enough really good information and content to put in it. So my personal preference is not to get tied to here's our April newsletter, here's our May newsletter, here's our June newsletter, because what you might find you're doing certain months, you just put one out there because you're feeling forced into it, because it's our monthly newsletter, whereas in fact actually there wasn't enough value to send something out. But of course you're committed already to doing that, and if there's a gap, it's like, oh, I didn't receive one this month, and so then people start to get the wrong impression. So maybe something that's a bit more appropriate could be to do something that is maybe more seasonal, or that maybe you do it based around a predetermined schedule that you share with the customers up front. So maybe it's a bi-monthly, which gives you more of an opportunity to get a load of content and then filter out the best and the worst of it, and then put out a really high quality piece. So I think for me, it goes back to that earlier point of less is more. I'd rather you did fewer but higher quality ones, and I'd rather you got the flow and the credibility, if you like, of good newsletters, rather than tying yourself into a flow that is going to come back and shoot you in the foot. So I'd avoid the monthly newsletter just for that very word. And the other thing with the word newsletter, well, one, it's not really a letter, and two, is it actually newsworthy? So if you can answer yes and yes to those two things, then do it. But I think more things that estimate and kind of help people to understand that they're part of a loyalty program, that they're a bit of a VIP, that doesn't really feel kind of newslettery. That feels much more like it's a loyalty campaign that's rewarding them for being an added value friend and advocate of the brand. And for me, that's a nicer positioning for how to use email than just to be thinking about it. It's a newsletter that just talks about us and we hope you like it. And that just feels and sort of sounds like it's going to get a little bit boring a little bit too quickly. So my recommendation is avoid the monthly and probably go down more the kind of loyalty VIP thing than trying to do a newsletter. And I think you'll probably find if you do A/B testing on those, I think you'll probably find that that's a lot more effective.